This is the awesome Great Bascinet, and it's an incredibly protective helmet that survived all the way through to the 16th century, still used in tournaments, if not very much at all in war. But the question is, why, at the beginning of the 15th century, did knights, particularly in England and France, feel the need to have such a hardcore helmet as this, when there were other really good helmets that had been around for a long time already? Hi folks, Matt Easton here of Schola Gladiatoria. Now this is a replica of the Frederick the Victorious Great Bascinet, a famous surviving example. There's not that many surviving examples in the world of Great Bascinets, although they appear a lot in art. So we know that they were very common, very popular types of helmet, particularly in England and France, but also in other areas as well, like Italy and Spain, and there were other forms of them in places like Germany as well. But the question is, why were these helmets evolved? And, you know, a lot of people come up with the simple answer of, well, it's more protective, obviously. But they come at a certain cost. They are not very practical. For typical campaign use, these pretty much went out of use by the middle of the 15th century. And, you know, these were particularly popular in England and France, and as I say, Spain as well to an extent as well, and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. But they were never really particularly popular in Italy. They did make them in Italy. They did sometimes use them in Italy, but they had other forms of helmet, the armet. We'll get to that in a second, which probably fulfilled a similar role to this. And there were other so-called bicoque helmets and forms of Great Bascinet that were around in Germany as well, but they were not really popular for very long on the battlefield. These were helmets that really came around about the year 1400, so the beginning of the 15th century, through to about 1450. But really, even before that, by about 1430, 1440, they were being supplanted by other types of helmets. So I guess we're really looking here at two questions. One, why did this specific form of helmet suddenly come about? What was the necessity? What was the driving force behind it? And secondly, why did it get supplanted? But before we get into that, a quick word about our sponsor for this video.
So today's kind sponsors of the channel are Hero Wars, and as regular viewers of this channel will know, in real combat what's really important is not just weapons and armour and how well you fight, but also tactics, strategy and teamwork. And the same is true in Hero Wars. You can have the best heroes in the game, but unless you use a good strategy, you're not going to win. One of the things I enjoy most about the game so far is actually exploring around and uncovering these realms. You've got to be tactical with your hero selection. Just like in real warfare, certain types of tank or plane might be good for certain things, and here, certain heroes are good for certain things as well. Some are good for healing, some are good at magic, some are good at fighting with swords. And also going through this game, you can collect unique artifacts and powers. You can level up your heroes with the best weapons, spells and skills. And as well as playing against the game itself, you can also play against real human players in PvP and also guild wars. It means you've got to plan out your strategies and choose the best ways of defeating the hardest foes. But if you've already assembled your dream team, I've got some great news for you. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Peach, a hero with a dark and mysterious past. To uncover this hero's past, you've got to engage in a 4-week epic adventure. And then you might get the chance to unlock this amazing new hero. And this offer's available from the 16th of February 2025 only for Hero Wars Alliance players. So can you assemble the best team, unlock the greatest gear, and outsmart your opponents? Test your skills in battle now. Download Hero Wars for free right now using the link down in my description or the QR code on screen.
So, thanks a lot for staying with me. Now let's get back into the main topic of this video and try and answer those two questions. Why did the Great Bascinet come around, firstly, and secondly, why did it more or less disappear, at least on the battlefield? Very briefly, before I take this helmet off, I just want to demonstrate to you that this almost sits entirely on my shoulders, okay? So it therefore interacts with my shoulders to some extent. So the type of armour, or shoulder armour rather, that you wear, pauldrons and spaulders, things like this, they interact with this helmet to a greater degree than is generally the case with a lot of other types of helmets like the sallet and bever, or the armet with the wrapper, for example, which is a bit similar really to a bever. And so this is a little bit more finicky to get the fit right, and also how it interacts with the rest of the armour, but is hugely protective, because you can see front and back my entire head is encased in steel, and we'll come back to why that might be in a second. And also it means that my neck is fully supported. So if someone smashes me in the side of the head with a poleaxe or whatever other heavy object, a plank of wood, then I'm not going to get my neck broken, because it can't physically happen. It will knock me sideways. Even if I've got the visor down and I get hit in the front, it will knock me backwards. And indeed, if we're wrestling and grappling, someone can grab this and leverage me around in a way that wouldn't happen if I can bend my neck. But my neck is massively protected against impacts and other things as well. Again, we'll come to that in a second. So I'm going to take this helmet off. So this particular helmet actually has a catch here. So first of all, this visor, which obviously if I put it down, you won't be able to hear me very well. Okay, so that's with the visor down. That's what the thing looks like. As mentioned, this is modelled on the Frederick the Victorious Great Bascinet. Made by the Massalia family in Italy. So you have to unlock the visor, put the visor up. I can now see and breathe perfectly well, so I could go around my business like this. However, I am relatively restricted in this. So if I want to look either way, I have to turn my entire body, or my waist at least, to look around. Yeah, okay, I can turn my head a bit in the helmet, but nowhere near as much as I would be able to with the sallet, or even with an armet, in fact. So you're a bit restricted, but as always, you gained a huge amount of protection by virtue of that. Now, the next thing to get this off is we've got a catch here. We push the button in there, that comes up. Whoom! Oh, I've got the thing off, and it is heavy. I tell you, not only we often talk about the restriction and the protection and things like that, but people often forget about weight, and bear in mind that you're also wearing a lot of weight in your body. This is a heavy helmet. The Great Bascinet is second only, I would say it's the second heaviest type of helmet. The first heaviest being a jousting helmet, like the frogmouth helms, for example. Some of them are ludicrously heavy, but they are literally, in some cases, bolted on, sometimes strapped onto the breastplate or cuirass to take lance strikes, and you're sitting on a horse. This is a helmet primarily for fighting on foot. So this is a lot of extra weight to carry on your body and on your shoulders. So to answer the question of why did this massive helmet develop like this, and yes, it does look a bit like an old diving helmet, old school diving helmet. Why did it develop to have this enormous, great, basically solid plate neck defence? Well, we have to just briefly mention what went before. So I mentioned this is called the Great Bascinet, or sometimes Grand Bascinet. So therefore what went before it was the normal bassinet. So the normal bassinet developed out of the Cervelia, which was what was worn underneath a great helm. Great helms gradually throughout the 14th century started to be abandoned for battlefield use, largely, not entirely. And the bassinet took over. At this point, you've now got a bassinet which was originally an open-faced helmet, and they add visors onto it. There's various types of visor. From the middle of the 14th century, so it's around 1340 onwards, we start to see visors permanently attached to bassinets. That means you can't put a great helm over the top of them anymore because the visor would be in the way. So these are standalone helmets. So they've gone, okay, I'm not going to use the great helm anymore, at least probably when fighting on foot or on campaign. I'm just going to use a bassinet with a visor on it. Various types of visor, without going into too much detail. Originally quite small little ones. We've got the little clap visors, as they're called, which hinge at the middle here. That's quite a German thing. And then other types of visors which pivot at the side, which eventually develop at the end of the, well, let's say by about the 1380s, 1390s, into what's commonly called the Houndskull bassinet. And this is one of the most famous designs of medieval helmet. I had one myself. I regret selling it. I wish I still had it. It'd be very useful for this video. But the Houndskull bassinet develops in the last couple of decades of the 14th century and continues well into the 15th century. It's still being used widely until 1420s, 1430s in some cases. Even occasionally you see it in art as an antiquated type of helmet in decades after that. So it was around for a good kind of 40 years in widespread military use. And an incredibly practical and versatile and protective type of helmet that was clearly very popular all over Europe, in every part of Europe. So, the question is, given how popular and versatile the Houndscar Bascinet with a male aventail, and the male isn't just chainmail, incidentally, it has padding underneath, so it has layers to it, and you could make the male very strong, you could double layer it and all sorts of things like that. Why did they move from having a male aventail, which gives you a lot of neck movement? Let's put this great bassinet down for a second so it's heavy. With the male aventail, it means that you can turn the head and it rotates freely on the cuirass. Very occasionally we see points, so it was sometimes tied to the jupon or surcoat that was worn over the harness, but it seems usually not. And you could turn the head around like this, which you can't really do with a great bassinet. You could look up and look down more easily, which you can't do with a great bassinet. It's great. It's a great type of helmet, and in fact that visor comes down quite low, so it's even got quite good frontal protection. So the question is, when that type of male aventail works so well, why did they add plates? Well, obviously the trite simplistic answer is for added protection, but added protection against what? Given that the male aventail with bassinet had been worn with a plate cuirass and plate arms and legs, you know, full plate harness for a few decades, why did some people, particularly, and this is important, particularly the English, the French and the Spanish, or Iberian should we say, Spanish and Portuguese, why did they come to having plate neck defences added? Well, this is where we have to go on a very slight tangent and say that plate neck defences weren't a new invention. You could go all the way back to the age of Troy and you can find plate neck defences on some Bronze Age armours. But if we come into the medieval period, we actually look even in the 13th century and certainly in the 14th century, we occasionally see additional plates added to things like the chapeau de fer was sometimes worn with a gorget, the bassinet with a male aventail, sometimes it had an added plate put on front of the aventail. Why? That's probably the same answer for this. We'll come back to them in a second. And lastly, great helms very occasionally, because great helms finish about here and therefore there's potential for things to come underneath. For jousting, they added an extra wrapper-like plate, like we see on later armets, down at the bottom of the great helm. So, we see that plate neck defences had existed for a long time. They weren't a new invention, but there was some reason why at the end of the 14th and beginning of the 15th century, all the people who had previously just had male aventails around their bassinets, in England and France particularly, started adding either an extra plate or an entirely plate neck defence instead of male. So, what was it that was forcing them to do this? So my answer fundamentally, a lot of you might already be shouting at the screen, is archery. Now I won't limit that to the longbow, okay? It can also be the crossbow as well. And I think that it's no coincidence that these were so popular in England and France. I'll talk about other countries in a second. In England and France, because the 100 Years' War was dominated as a feature of their warfare by archery. Obviously, English armies consisted of huge numbers of archers. I mean, in some cases, 4 out of 5 soldiers were archers in some English armies. So huge numbers of longbowmen in that case. But of course, the French used large numbers of both French and sometimes Genoese mercenary and other hired-in crossbow people. So whether it's crossbow bolts or longbows, what you now find is you're having a lot of things shot at you. Now, this wasn't necessarily to such an extent the case in other parts of Europe, but if we look at other areas where this type of helmet was popular, for example, the Iberian Peninsula, what we see there is actually the presence of quite a lot of English soldiers with longbows. So we actually see quite a bit of, around this time, of longbowmen, essentially. Okay. Now, you also find this in northern Italy, thanks to the Great Company and the White Company and all of those kind of English mercenaries and French mercenaries who were operating in northern Italy. So I think, and you might massively disagree with this, I think it's probably not a coincidence that in England and France and other neighbouring areas where they suddenly saw a big increase in the numbers, the volume of archers and crossbowmen, that the knights, whose primary job was to stay alive, and I'll come back to that in a second, started wearing plates here instead of mail. Now, is it true to say that you can always shoot an arrow through a mail aventail? No. However, my good friend Todd has done a series of very famous and well prepared and well carried out tests of arrows versus armour. And I imagine that most people watching this video right now will have seen the arrows versus armour tests. Now, it will be noted that plate pretty much always stops arrows. Not always, but most of the time. However, a weak point is a mail aventail if it is attached to the bassinet. Moreover, and particularly because the shapes of visors tend to, if you hit the face here, tend to send things downwards here. And the shape of breastplates that are globose and kind of rounded, I've just went to try and find the breastplate, but I put it away, tend to send things upwards. And in fact, that's why they have the V at the top. So if you've got things here coming downwards and things coming here coming upwards, this junction where your neck is might get quite a lot of shooting at it. Moreover, there are written sources, Froissart's Chronicles talking about the Battle of Poitiers, for example, which talks about the French knights were scared that the English arrows would penetrate their visors. Was it visors? Or was it the aventail around the edge of the visors, which is a weak point because it's mail instead of plate? One thing I should just fleetingly mention, actually, is there is some plate underneath some of them mail aventail. So when you see a mail aventail, the bit which comes around the face, around here, does actually have plate underneath it. But the bits down here don't necessarily, although sometimes they might have had a hidden plate underneath there. Sounds like quite a good idea there. So, I should patent that. So, it makes sense, if you're in an environment with lots of arrows flying around, that you would want to have additional plate defences at this juncture. And to me it also makes sense of why the English and French particularly gravitated towards great bassinets when, if you look at Germany at that time, most of them stuck to mail aventails, because I don't think German knights for the most part were being shot with so many arrows, or at least heavyweight longbow and crossbow arrows, as English and French and sometimes Spanish and Northern Italian knights were. There's another interesting point here. So if we look at the effigies and brasses, which are one of the ways that we date armour and study the intricacies of armour, one thing you'll find is in the English record, we actually find up until about the year 1405, around there, and that's a really interesting date, around the year 1405, most English knights on tombs with their brasses or effigies have mail aventails still. After about 1405, more and more of them have great bassinets with either an added plate on the front of an otherwise normal bassinet or a full great bassinet. An earlier form than this is a mid-15th century type, but a form of great bassinet with plates all the way around here. Why might that happen in 1405? Well, I put this to you, and again, this is conjecture, but it's a talking point, okay? And you might think, wow, that makes sense, or you might completely disagree, and that's fine. Get posting down below. In 1403 was the Battle of Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury, depending how you want to pronounce it. Now, around this period, the English had been used to fighting at that point in history, they'd been used to fighting the Scots and the French, and very occasionally the Spanish. Now, none of those groups of people tended to shoot an awful lot of missiles at them. If you read about the Battle of Crécy, Poitiers, any of the wars up to the Great Peace, and then the Condottieri wars and the wars with the different mercenary companies in Italy, for the most part, it was the English shooting other people, okay? So if you are English, let's say, and you are used to your army having overwhelming firepower, okay, I know it's not fire because that's guns, but anyway, you get what I mean. Suddenly, you find, because of a series of internal conflicts, much like the beginnings of the Wars of the Roses, and also because of your wars with the Welsh, which had tons of longbowmen, you suddenly find, I'm an English knight, I've been fighting the French for years, we always used to shoot them a load and then stab them. Suddenly, I'm fighting other English and I'm fighting Welsh, and they're shooting at me. What are you going to do? To me, one of the first things you're going to do in about 1405 is go, that mail aventail, I'm finding that I'm having to fight against longbowmen now, which I never, my dad didn't have to do in the wars in France or Italy 20 years ago. We found that we were shooting the enemy, but now the enemy is shooting us. What are you going to do? You're going to switch to the great bassinet. So, my kind of conclusion, at least as far as this video goes, is that the great bassinet, particularly in England and for very similar reasons in France, developed because of archery. Some people say it's because of the lance and all this kind of. I don't really agree with that, and I won't go into the reasons why here, but there we go. I think that primarily, although neck defences were definitely important in jousting and against lances, I think that in this particular sphere, this date is important in England and France for the reasons that I've mentioned, and it's because of missile weapons. Now, the question is, so the second question, and I'll keep this one much shorter, why did the great bassinet fade out of use? Well, fundamentally, as I've mentioned, it's not a very versatile type of helmet. It is a tank. It is the most protective helmet, pretty much. If you want to fight with poleaxes or do Blossfechten, Harnisfechten, or half swording, if you want to do armoured HEMA, or if you want to walk into an arrow storm or this kind of thing, this is pretty much the best helmet you can get for fighting on foot. However, it is not very good on horseback. Okay, so the advantage that the Armet has over this is you've got a wrapper at the front which offers a similar amount of protection to the great bassinet, but because the back doesn't have that large plate, and in fact you've got a little male aventail underneath it, it means that with the Armet you can be sat on your horse and you can still look around like this without having to turn your body. Great bassinets were worn on horseback, but bear in mind that your contact with the horse and your control of the horse is very, very important. And if you're having to turn your whole body to look around, which you do with a great bassinet, that's not very good. So it doesn't seem like these were ever really, although they were used, they weren't popular as mounted heavy helmets. So the Armet kind of answers that problem. And the Armet you can use on foot as well. So the Armet's more versatile, certainly on horseback, and you can turn the head. Then, of course, we come to the Sallet and Bever. Let's grab the Bever here. So as we've talked about in previous videos, the Sallet, I've actually only got an open face one to hand, but obviously they have visors very often. The Sallet and Bever are separate units, and the beauty of that is they're modular. You can take the Bever off very quickly and easily and put it back on if needs be. And you can fully turn the head, you can look up and down. It's just way, way more versatile. Yes, it's not as protective, and for that reason, these are quite rubbish, in my opinion, for things like practicing poleaxe fighting. And in fact, if you want to practice poleaxe fighting, there's no question that this is the best type of helmet. But remember that that's a very specific requirement, and most of us HEMA practitioners, or reenactors even today, you're only doing a specific activity, a combat-based activity, for a relatively short period of time. A soldier has to function as a soldier. You have to maybe march or ride for miles. You might have to help, break down a door or go into some buildings and kind of, flush some people out. Or you might have to climb up ladders or dig a ditch, all this type of stuff. So for general military use, a helmet that goes on the top of your head and a Bever that goes on the front when you need it is far, far more versatile. So, to conclude, in a nutshell, I believe that the region of popularity of the great bassinet, of where its real source of massive, massive, overwhelming popularity, England and France, and the date when it was massively popular, from about 1400 to about 1430, is because of the nature of the fighting between the English and French in that time, dictated by overwhelming amounts of archers fighting on foot, not on horseback. And I believe that the reason that it went out of use was because it's incredibly specialised to that, but not very versatile to other things you might want to do. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. I have, of course, continued to be Matt Easton, and I will be again next time as well. Please give me a like and make sure you're subscribed as well. And yeah, as I say, I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.